Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Erudition Network. Welcome to our Thursday night interactive Black History and Knowledge session. I am Eddie Phillips. I am the host of this show and the founder of the Erudition Network. We venture to come on here every Thursday to do, a little instruction in Black history, go over some subjects in Black history, talk about things that you may not have been taught in school or just in general, and to share our knowledge and grow our knowledge in our communities. We do, as I said, we do this show every Thursday. It is a labor of love to come on and talk about this. I am a person who has studied history for quite so many years. And one of the things that I love to do on here is to get on and have us to discuss our history and things that you know I know we don't always get um, in our schools. Um, we have been doing this show. Oh man, I realized yesterday that at the end of this month, um, coming into February, we will be at a 2 year mark of doing this show. Um, with very little gap in days in which um, we aren't on. So this has been um, a ride, being on and teaching and instructing in Black history. So tonight, I early this afternoon, I wrestled with the idea if I was even going to do a show this evening, um, and if I was just going to wait until next week. We were not, I wasn't on last week. I had some things that came up. So I definitely wanted to get on here today and not go another week. We got Dr. King's birthday coming up um, next week. And I thought, let me go ahead and get on here, and because I know we're going to have a show, a pretty in-depth show next week, which we typically do on Dr. King's birthday, where we go over some of the tenets of Dr. King's work, highlight the history of his life. Um, but I wanted to make sure that we got on tonight and discuss some things, and just really, really um, did a show. And the problem with that is I didn't know which way we would go tonight, and I still don't. Um, but the one good thing about being a historian is that there's always history. there's always there's always somewhere to go, and there's always something to discuss. Um, I I I like the interactive um, because if and when we get people in the live who actually come on and watch the live, we really do get good participation and folks asking questions. And it makes it a lot easier on me because then I can just get on and kind of like, you know, just answer the questions that are out there and um, meet the needs of whatever people need to know. Um, but I want to send out another announcement right here on our some of our social media, just to remind people that we're on. But so you might see me typing or hear me typing a little bit. But no, I really, really, I love it. Right? I love the idea of getting on and asking those questions. So the only problem is a lot of times because I understand scheduling, um, we don't get a lot of people as many as I would like on the interactive, and it puts me in a position sometimes where I'm like, man, do I even do the show because um, do I even do an interactive because you know sometimes we just don't get the amount of people that we would like, but it's whatever. We still do the show. We still um, go about what we're doing. So I'm happy with that. Anyway, I'm bloviating right now. I think. tonight, since I didn't really know where we were going to go tonight, and I do want this to be a productive show. Every week I get questions in, and that also helps me too. I get questions in from viewers. I get questions from people from around the world, right? People ask me things about history and bring up thoughts that they've had on, what's going on. So I think tonight I may talk a little bit about a couple of things, some of the questions that we've gotten in this week. One of the things that I got in this week, I spent some time because I have to put things out on social media. So I spend my time sometimes going on and watching, and I'm going to try to be very PC about this, watching people on social media who claim to teach history. And I clown no one for wanting knowledge, but there are things that I hear a lot of times that I'm like, whoa, who are these people? What are they teaching? What are we doing? Got some people here. Hey, baby, how you doing? Why are you bucking your eyes? Hello. Pastor Razor, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us. But I run into these things. I was scrolling through recently, just yesterday, and I kid you not, I ran into like 7 different people on live on TikTok teaching something. I won't say it's Black history, but I will say it's something. Teddy, you said basically, where are the sources? Yeah, that's a whole nother issue. There were no sources. People coming up with so many Here's the thing. When we study history, rather, whatever book you pick up, rather you're studying history from Western civilization, Eastern civilization, rather you're studying early American history, rather you're studying African history, no matter what you're studying, you should have some grounding in what you're doing and know, as you read, research. If a historian tells you something that is far-fetched, right? Or a person who you assume is a historian, because that's another issue, that is far-fetched, that sounds unrealistic. Like if I tell you that the Egyptians were aliens from outer space who came to save the human race, right? You go, oh, okay, but why do you say that? Why do you think that? And you could go pull up, okay, where did they base their knowledge upon? If a preacher is preaching to you and he goes over a part of the Bible and he tells you a section of the Bible, he's referencing the word, or he should be. Now, if he tells you some far-fetched story about the Bible and says that, Jesus was an alien and he can't validate that with any scripture, then you can say, okay, that's a fallacy at best and a lie by evidence. And so as I was going through these programs, I don't like to call people liars. What I try to do is I try to be judicial with them. That's the word, right? I try to be non-judgmental. I try to be even and fair. And what I tell them is, okay, I'll give you an example. There was a young lady on one of these shows that I saw on social media, and young Black woman. And she came online live with this guy, right? He calls himself the history redneck or whatever, something like that. And she was a sister. She's an African American, and she asked him about wealth distribution and how wealth distribution worked in this country. And her point was reparations. Her point was that Black people should have reparations because they were denied the wealth that many white Americans' families were given. Well, this man told her that in fact was a lie. He told her that only 15 to 20% of people in the history of this country have ever given, of wealthy people, have ever given their wealth over to their families or, pass the wealth down. And I listened to this and I said, okay, my first thought, which should be your first thought, and that's what we try to teach you with, even with our network, ask questions, was where'd you get these statistics from? Where'd this data come from? Where's your 20 to 15%? What study was done to give you that percentage? Well, she didn't ask that question, so I typed it in and I asked the question. And wasn't a lot of people watching because, lives are what they are. You don't always get a lot of people, but he saw my comment. I know he saw it. And he did not respond to it because he couldn't answer it. But the question has to always be, right? Where is this from? One of our biggest problems, and the reason why history is taught so erroneously in our culture, is because as you look at history, you will notice, even when you look at the textbooks that come through in our schools, right? Despite the fact that scholars, academics, and everybody challenges it and says, hey, this doesn't seem right. Year after year, books and things are cloned. Rhetoric is passed. Lies and fallacies are given to others, and they take it as truth, right? And it creates a uniformity that misinforms the public. What that does is that compromises people. Teachers are compromised to start to believe something that's not true. Folk tales, legends, myths, things that are based on reality, right? But are fictional in concept. When you hear about George Washington never telling a lie, when we tell the story of Honest Abe, right? What we're doing is we're perpetuating lies that seep into our study as truths. And what we try to do here, what I try very hard to do, is I try to tell you that to challenge knowledge. I'm always going to give you a book. I'm always going to, rather I agree with the book or disagree, you're going to get something from me to challenge the knowledge that has been shared. And so as I go through social media, as I watch this thing play out, because there are a lot of people who are thirsty for knowledge, but they don't know where to go. They don't know what to seek out. We are people who, if I learn something, I can't constrain my learning and just hold it to myself. I have to share it. A little while ago, I had a conversation. Someone sent me a message about abortion, because, that was a big thing that had come up over the last few months with the repeal of Roe versus Wade and all of these things that were going on. And I had to tell this person, because they were in disbelief, right? That how can a country step back like this? And I had to tell this individual that this is not in a vacuum. This is never in a vacuum. History shows us that whether they were Democrat or Republican, for a time, especially in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, many Americans believed in the denial of birth. And before the time of World War I, World War II, I had to tell this person that eugenics was the thing in the country. Eugenics was huge, right? And so if we are looking at places like Planned Parenthood, because this person was, they stopped Planned Parenthood. And I had to remind this person that Planned Parenthood was started by radicals who did not want Blacks, Indians, Asians, did not want them to have children. And that even people like the famed Helen Keller, you all remember Helen Keller. I remember my auntie, she used to love watching that movie. What was the name of that movie back in the day? The Water Maker, the whatever. They used to show it every year, right? Where the lady was tapping into Helen Keller's hand and she was able to start to understand the words water and everything else. And everybody loved Helen Keller. But history shows us different things about Helen Keller. Though Helen Keller was blind and deaf, she was a proponent of eugenics. And she believed that people in poverty, people who look like me and you, should not have children because they would be the dirge of society. Now, she didn't see what she said as racist. She didn't see it as a problem. And it's crazy to look at a woman who had been born with all of these disabilities still have a fanatical idea that certain babies and people should not be born. But we're not taught that. We're not taught that. The Rainmaker, I think that was the name of the movie. We're not taught that. What we're taught about Helen Keller is that she overcame her disabilities. In some of the liberal circles, we're taught that she was a proponent for people who look like me and you. But that is not supported by the history. When I teach history on here, specifically Black history, I'm giving you real history. I'm not giving you astral thoughts on history. I'm not talking to you about some kind of mysticism that has no point. Even when I talk about ancient books such as the Bible, those are validated history because people have gone to go dig things up to go find these nations and cultures. And guess what? Because God will not be mocked, they have found them. But we're getting caught up in fantasy and alluding to that as history. And that is a problem. That is a problem. Because while we're so caught up in the rhetoric of lunacy, right? Then we get lost. We get lost. Mike, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Are the worst sport. Okay, I don't know what that means, but hey, God bless you with your Michael Jordan comments. If you don't like Michael Jordan, but this is not the program for that. No, we do not. But you can type a respectable request or claim into the chat, and we definitely will answer it. Thank you. You know, again, and let me tell you also, you can always send us something to the Erudition Network on Facebook. Put it in the comments for YouTube. You can visit us on our webpage at theeruditionnetwork.com, and you can do all of that, and we will be there, and you leave your questions, and we will definitely get answers to you. You know, but I got into a rant about that. But my point to you all tonight is that there is value in what we do here. There is value with your interaction. I just think that what we have to really, really acknowledge is the difference between history and fantasy, myth, folktale. And we have to stop doing that. And somewhere in all of this, a lot of people don't understand the difference. They don't get the difference. I'll give you an example of a folktale. A folktale is something that is based on something. So when we were kids, one of the biggest folktales from Black people was John Henry. You all remember the John Henry folktale? He was a steel driving man, right? And John Henry raced against a locomotive. Thank you very much. You're always welcome. Thank you. But John Henry's folktale story gets from around the fact that, yeah, all of them, John Henry, Paul Bunyan, Johnny Appleseed, right? I forget the guy who could lasso the whirlwinds. But all of these are based on myths. The truth of it is, whoever John Henry was, and there are some thoughts historically that this was a real person or could have been a real person, not fully validated, secondary sources, but the reality of it is that there were Black people at the heart of that story, at the heart of that folktale, at the heart of that myth lies the fact that Black men drove train tracks across this country, driving by back pain and under vein of death to get the Transcontinental Railroad up and running. And the racial idea of the hardworking Negro who would die to please the rail workers, the railmen. Now, what did that do? What was the purpose of that folktale? What was the purpose of that myth? It was to drive home the idea that the hardworking Black man is needed, even unto vein of death. Even if he killed himself working, he'd be honored. It's ignorant. But our ancestors may not have known, have a lot of the discernment. And so we teach these things the incorrect way. When I talk about folktales and myths and things like that, I try to give you the historical background to it so you understand that, okay, well, that was a trap. That was okie doke. A lot of the folktales that were put out, Mike talked about Johnny Appleseed and Paul Bunyan, and a lot of that stuff was to allow us to think of America in this folklorish kind of mentality of the expansion of this country, as we went with the Monroe Doctrine that told us that we have destiny to take over this land, even from those who had already been here. Manifest destiny is the ethic and the history of this country. And the engine of Manifest Destiny was African Americans. You know, they don't even like you to say slaves anymore. The correct legal term now is enslaved persons. Because if you say slave, that hurts people's feelings. Not even making that up. So as I go through social media, and that was the whole point of this 10 minutes of talking about this, I see a lot of this. And as a historian, I try to get on and I try to talk to people, and I try very hard to have intellectual encounters with them where I try to push them to the correct path. You know, I was in a car a couple of days ago with one of my sons, with my 14-year-old. And I told him this, and I meant this. We do not teach children to think empirically. We do not teach children to question the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Because the truth is, we weren't taught to think like that. We weren't given those tools to think like that. And we can't get better because we don't have those tools. We don't know how to ask the relevant question. You know, many months ago, I did a show here on Erudition, and I talked about how we still think cyclically. We think in a circle. We ask the same questions. Here we are coming up on Dr. King's birthday celebration. And you will see infographics, you will see videos, and you will see commercials talking about the dream of Dr. King. It's a great rhyme too, so it stays with people. The dream of Dr. King. And they won't talk to you about the other speeches of Dr. King. They won't talk to you about the hard times of Dr. King's life outside of a letter from Birmingham jail. There's certain things that they bring up. You know, I remember reading in one of and a lot of people don't even tell you to go pick up King's books. Dr. King was very prolific. He wrote a lot. He talked about being pulled out of jails and taken in the car into the backwoods and not knowing if he was going to live, and praying to God, and his people finding out that they were moving him and following the vehicle. He wrote about this. And the officers, when they realized that they were being trailed, turning around and taking him back to jail and saying that they were transporting him, but something came up. We have to do better. And we have to learn these things and stop being caught up in the same old rigmarole, same old stories. Exactly. The story is that John Henry was a prisoner at the time when prisons were used for labor. He was a young man that could actually drive more stakes in the ground while laying railroad tracks than any other man in that group or area. So he made a name doing this and became a legend. Thank you for that history, because I know that there is some legitimate history that was put out about who John Henry was. But I also know that why that myth became so popular. Public schools limit what they teach students for free oftentimes. Public schools are public schools, and they are ran by people who have stake in the game of keeping some people ignorant. That is the word. They don't want, when you look at what is ignored in textbooks, I often ask people when they talk to me about history, I say, name me one. If you've been in school for 8 years or 12 years, you went through school. How many times did you actually finish your history book for the year? I have a history book right here. It's thick, right? How many times did you actually finish even half of your history book? And the truth is, a lot of the curriculum is designed on purpose to only get you so far. There's a great book. The author actually passed away. James Lowen. James Lowen was actually a teacher, and he actually wrote history books. And he had a big case in the South for trying to put out an actual truthful history book that could be studied by students. And there was a big legal fight that got all the way to the Supreme Court. And Professor Lowen, I think it was last year, passed away during the COVID issue. But he spent years teaching. He wrote a book, Lies My Teacher Told Me. It's one of his books, right? Great book for you to go pick up. Great book for you to go read and see what's going on, what was done and why it was done that way, right? We have handicapped ourselves in our history. And as we approach Black History Month, as we get to Black History Month, I want to make sure, one of my things that I plan on doing for Black History Month, I will be on every day. For those 28 days, I will be on. I think the only days I will not be on as a live for the time will be on Sundays. But for pretty much that entire month, I will be on. There will be something that will come from Erudition, and we're going to take that entire month to learn every day about somebody in Black history that you may not have heard about. We're going to teach a different history. We're going to try to get ourselves out of the cyclical thinking and try to get ourselves to another level of asking questions. I got something else coming for you too as we get into Black History Month, because we have to start teaching history differently. And I've been working very hard on something to get that done. I'm not going to say too much, but there's something coming because we got to do better. We got to do better. And, it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost. Oftentimes I posted, Pastor Ray said, I don't ever remember finish. And most people have not. They don't. Because, and teachers will tell you, that's really not the focus of the curriculum. So as I asked my sons a couple of years ago, I said, so, what do you learn in history? And my sons told me, all of them, everybody had their own, but they all said, it's like, well, Daddy, we cover the same thing every year. We talk about the founding fathers. We talk about, we get up to maybe the great, up to the Civil War. We talk a little bit about the Great Depression. They rarely get to what is known as current history, right? So the Vietnam is now starting to get into some curriculum, but they really very rarely talk about it. The war on drugs, which is a huge part of the country's dynamic, is rarely covered in history books. We very rarely even get into the civil rights movement outside of Dr. King. So all of those groups that were around and operating during that time don't get any kind of exposure to our children until they get much higher in education or maybe take an African American studies course. Nobody's teaching them about the Black Muslims. Nobody's teaching them about the Black Panther Party. Nobody's teaching them about CORE. Nobody's teaching them about SNCC. Nobody's teaching them about what the LCLC actually was. Nobody teaches them any of that, but they do know about the populist movement. They do know, right, about what happened with the country with its finances. They learn those things generally. They're not taught about the history of presidential failures in the area of civil rights, in the area of Black people's advancement. Woodrow Wilson is still considered a hero in history books. And Woodrow Wilson was one of our most racist presidents ever. But he's given credit for the idea of the UN. But Woodrow Wilson was the man, right, who took Thomas Dixon into the White House, right, who was a classmate and a friend of his, who wrote the book The Klansman that later became Birth of a Nation, and he praised it. And Birth of a Nation's release kicked off a whole nother era of lynching of Black people throughout the country. We're not taught that. We're not taught that Woodrow Wilson separated the idea and pulled Blacks who had been put into the federal government, and how he yanked them out of the federal and segregated the federal government that then fed down to the state governments and helped to push the idea of Jim Crow as a common thing, not only federally, but not only in the state, but also in the federal government, in the North and the South, in different ways in which we interacted. Black people could interact with society. That's not taught to our kids. But we spend so much time teaching other things. The hardship of the American people. I had a conversation with my sons once about the Great Depression. The Great Depression was hard, horrible. People all over the country out of work, folks dying from poverty-related symptoms, starving to death, disease. But it was even more horrible in the Black community. The reported thefts down in the South and the killings down in the South, where if a Black man planted a crop and was able to feed his family, whites came and stole it at gunpoint and death. But that's not talked about. It's not talked about, the racial issues in this country that still feed into modern time. Recently, I was perusing a documentary about George Bush, W. Bush, and Katrina. And I laughed at how they skipped over the whole thing with Katrina when they start talking about the thousands of people that died. How many were African American? And how many of them reported violence upon themselves from their white neighbors? The lies of people, only Black people looting, and they weren't the only ones. The justification to go and harm, shoot, murder, steal. And how those mentalities could come into our minds because great grandma, great whatever, they did it too. They did it too. When we don't teach our history properly, I got a homework assignment for all you who are watching, who watch this. I've told you this before. Go pull up the You can go look this up online. Go pull up the lynching of Jesse Washington. Jesse Washington. And look at when it happened. And then I want you to consider how many people were involved. You could look at the pictures and see how many people showed up for the lynching of this black man. To cut his bones and to the things they did. I want you to read it. And consider this. For the amount of people who were involved in Texas, who are they related to? And who are their grandchildren? Great-grandchildren. When you read about people finding parts of Jesse Washington 50 years after, because grandma, granddaddy, or somebody kept it. That's significant. Those are real historical. That's not myths. Those are not folk tales. That's real history. That's not myth. That's not me telling you that the Egyptians was feeding mummies to some spiritual dog. This is reality. That still affects us today because that's not that long ago. Because we can't face these ideas, these points in history, we repeat them. During the Trump presidential election, the first one, there were black hip hop artists, actors, singers. My son told me last night, he said, Daddy, bad examples of who black people really are. That's what he called them. Who told black people, your vote don't matter. Who told black people, your vote doesn't count. And ignored all of these black folks who were killed for your right to vote. It's insane. But that's what happened. And we see it in today's current time. Current situation. People were killed, murdered just because they wanted to vote. And yet we are still telling people, your vote don't matter. It's a game, man. African Americans have fought for the vote in this country well before the civil rights movement. In some parts of the country, African American men were allowed to vote. Most blacks don't know that. Freemen were allowed to vote. The denial came because of the racial politics of this country. And over time, it was stripped away from you. Black men wanted to be citizens and freemen from the Revolutionary War time before the establishment of this country, and they were promised freedom for them and their families. That's where the freemen before the Civil War came from. That's who was in the North. That's who the Fugitive Slave Act was pushed towards. Can you imagine? You fought for the actual establishment of this country, and then someone comes and snatches your wife or child and takes them down to slavery. But we don't teach this history because we don't find value in it. And so what happens is we watch people lie to us. We let them get on and tell things that are wrong. Mike, you're absolutely right. There are a lot of young black people who lean to the notion that voting is a waste of time. And you know why? You know why? Because we don't teach them, right, about the people who died. We many of us have relatives who were affected, who died, murdered. I shouldn't say died, murdered. But we don't talk to them about it. And so we let people who don't know, people who are popular, as my son said, the people who are not really a good example of us, we let them tell us what to do because they're popular, because we don't teach the history to our children. And I often tell people this: if you can't teach it, move out the way and let somebody else teach it. Or better yet, sit down with your kids and learn it together. Learn it together. How hard is that? Sit down with your child and learn those things together. And you will be surprised. You will be surprised how it will open up conversation between you and yours. You will be surprised at how much you know they will grow. Stop lying to yourself that this is not important. Stop lying to yourself that this doesn't have value. The crazy thing is that us gaining the right to vote didn't happen. Now, it did not. And many of our young people don't know that either, Mike. Many of them think, and if you look at it in the way that they're taught, they have no connection. And in fact, you do. Many of the people in Chicago, their families are in Chicago because of the Great Black Migration. They're in Chicago, California, and Los Angeles. They're in Detroit. They're in New York because their families left the South because they were denied rights. And they thought they could do better in the North. But the North had its own different system. When we talked a couple of months ago about Red Summer, and we were going into the whole idea of Red Summer and trying to talk about how bad Red Summer was, and I started to tell people, I'm like, you know, we really have to go into Red Summer, because what happens is that we lie to ourselves. We forget why our families did what they did, why they left, why they pulled away. 1919 was 1 year of this. 1 year. It's not the full example of what we went through, but I always try to look at 1919 as an apex of horror. Horror. From different areas all over the country. Because, see, when Birth of a Nation came out, it empowered people to think that I can do whatever I want to do, and no one is going to stop me. Because why? Because we've already seen in our films and in what's going on that there's no reason. There's no reason that they'll do anything to us. We don't teach them. And we got to do better. I think me and Pastor Razor had a conversation a little while back when we talked about Elaine, Arkansas in 1919. That's a huge example of Black men trying to form a union, murdered, killed. we don't talk about what really has happened in this country. We don't. We talk around it. We spend so much time talking about those years of the Dust Bowl and the Depression, but Black people were catching hell and trying to survive. I say all this tonight, and I know it was a lot, but I say all this tonight because we, I do this show. It's funny because, like I said, when I came on, for you those you were here, I didn't know what I was going to cover tonight. But so I just went off of what I seen this week, what I know, and where I see that we are. Mike, I think it was your wife that sent me a thing, a question. She sent a question in for Erudition. I really appreciate it, and I think we're going to do a lesson. I have yet to watch the movie, what is The Woman King. I haven't watched it because I have expectations as a historian. I've never have faith in Hollywood to do a lot of our movies right. So I want to make sure when I watch it that I had time to sit down and really analyze it, enjoy the movie first, and then watch it and see what they covered and what they didn't cover. But if you don't know, talking about the female warriors of Domi, right, and how that came to be, and how that eventually went away. But it is an important story to talk about these warrior Amazons, these women of Domi, and how strong they were in protecting their culture and their civilization. So I may do an actual show on that because it is a great story to get into. But I want to watch the movie first and give people an idea if that's something that you should watch. I do believe that it is something you should watch, whether you get everything out of it or not. But I want to make sure I do my due diligence on that. But I do appreciate her question about it. I really do. Because if we don't start to have something that launches us into our history, we a lot of times we don't know what to ask. I enjoyed it, but I went in with the perspective of not really having knowledge of the history of those female warriors. A lot of people don't, and it is an interesting part of history, the culture, the society, and what they did and what they bought, and even how those kingdoms came into being. Is a very, very, very interesting story, their origin. And so I would like to do a program talking about that. Maybe we'll push that off to February as we do some of these shows, since we're going to be doing a lot more shows in February, and go into that. But we're about 5 minutes out of to the end of the program. I see we still got a couple of people still online. If you have any questions, concerns, like I said, tonight's episode, I didn't really know what we would talk about, but I can talk to you about any kind of history for about an hour, right? It's because I know enough. I know enough that we can do that. I still gave you several books that you could read. As a matter of fact, let me say this. We were just talking about the Domi and the Amazons. There's a great book. It's I shouldn't say great. It's an okay book, right? It's called The Kingdom of Domi, right? The history from the beginning to the end. You can get it on Amazon. I believe it's very cheap on Amazon. If you have Kindle Unlimited or something like that, you can go pull that and you might be able to even check it out for free. Another book that you could probably get, it's in the Carter G. Woodson books. It's the African Heroes and Heroines. That's another great book, and I'll probably dump this into the on the chats after the program, like I usually do. But those are great books to go pick up, read, and really get an understanding of who of that culture before we ever do the show, right? And I encourage that, because that means if you go pull those books up or go buy those books and you read, even if you read somewhat through them, you don't even get through all of them. It gives us something to talk about, and gives, because you have now may have questions, right? You may have questions on, oh, okay, what was this about? I believe another book that you can get for that particular subject for the Amazons is The Wives of the Leopard. Another good book. It's probably one of my favorite books on the subject. It's in my collection, so I would suggest that one before you go get the Kingdom of Domi. I think you should go get The Wives of the Leopard. It's a great research book. It kind of goes more in depth, and it'll give you a lot more historical guideline, as well as opposed to just a quick synopsis that the other books would give. So I would suggest The Wives of the Leopard. But if not, then yes, go get the Kingdom of Domi, and you will be able to get a lot of knowledge from either one of those books, right? Or the African Heroes and Heroines by Carter G. Woodson. Either one of those will be fine. I agree, Mike. Those are usually the better episodes because I can kind of go off the cuff. Black History Month is coming. As I get ready to sign off of here for this episode, let me tell you something. Black History Month is coming. Black History Month is coming. We teach Black history all throughout the year. But Black History Month is important, right? Because it has a historical background to it by Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black History Week, that later became Black History Month. So it's important that we celebrate that month as a historical marker for us to delve into our history. I have a huge plan. One of the biggest things I've done for Erudition will kick off on Black History Month. And I hope that you all support our efforts, because it's a different thing that I'm doing, but I'm excited about it. And I'm not going to go too much in detail. You'll hear more over the next couple of weeks as we get closer to February. But we're going to do something huge, and we want you to be a part of it. So stand by, because this is going to get really, really interesting. And I promise you, if you get involved with what we're doing in February, you will learn something, and your families will learn something. And it will be something that you can continually learn from. And that's all I'll say about that. But let me tell you all, thank you everybody who came on and joined us for this live. I'm trying really hard to get on here at the right time and get in and get out within that hour. Please tell your friends, family, associates about the interactive. We will be here, God willing, every Thursday for your questions and your comments, and to be able to talk like the gentleman that was on here earlier talking about Michael Jordan. Everybody is invited to come on and leave their comments. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I will see you all again next week. But until then, have a blessed weekend for you and your family. And thank you for being with us. Have a good one.